like to call to order the City Council work session agenda on April 18th. It is now 4:30 p.m. and there will be a regular meeting following the work session, which will begin at 6 p.m. We're not all around the table. We're still missing Councilman Campbell and Councilman Osborne, but we're going to go on. So if you will, we may have to remind them of this. I'm just going to read kind of the directions of this evening. We'll have one item on the agenda, which is a continuation of the draft budget presentation discussion. And Council, we really did. You made a lot of progress, and you provided a lot of good feedback to the staff on that April 18th meeting. And Lori Wingenroth, our budget and research manager, will be picking up where we left off on Monday and will guide us to the presentation that remains. We have been given a hard copy of tonight's presentation for your reference. Everybody got it? Has Bill got it? Okay, good. Lori will start with a short recap of what staff took from the last meeting as changes to the draft budget based on our discussion and consensus from the council. We will not be going back into the supplements other than the recap items. After the recap, Lori will lead us through the balance of presentations, beginning with the capital improvement program. Lori will respond to our questions, and she will look to department representatives to help her if our questions are deeper than her knowledge. If we are nearing the 6 p.m. meeting and we're not finished the presentation and discussion, Lori will help me by mentoring and looking for a break, monitoring, not mentoring. Well, you could mentor me tonight, I tell you. Yeah, that worked too. And looking for a breaking point to allow a short break before the regular meeting. We will recess the work session, reconvene it after the regular meeting. Lori, please proceed with providing this recap.
Thank you. What I wanted to do is let you know that at your places there is a set of hard copies of the slides that our presentation will be going through today. There are a few new slides to go through the recap of what we accomplished last time. And as you go through it and you get into the later parts where we're repeating information that was in the presentation we provided you 2 weeks ago, there's a reference written off to the side to tell you what slide number it was in the prior presentation, in case you have notes or something like that on your other version of the presentation. It was primarily to help you make your way between the two presentations. So as the mayor indicated, we did get a lot of great feedback, answered some questions, maybe not all of them, and we'll try to get some more of those answered. And so I'll start by kind of walking through what we felt we garnered from the last session. But I want to start with one item, which was an error in the listings that I provided you. They're on pages 10 and 11 of the supplemental listing and on Schedule 11. I failed to identify two of the items that were recommended and for funding, and so I wanted to draw those to your attention. They were both related to the engineering department. One was there was overtime for their inspections area, and the recommendation is to fund that at half the amount. It was requested at 40, and we were recommending a $20,000 item there. And the other was a GIS high-resolution aerial imagery item. That is a $10,000 ongoing item that was also intended to be recommended and was simply left off the list. Based on the conversations and the feedback, the changes that staff has determined seemed like we were looking or heading towards in terms of revisions to the draft budget, where it was a clear message that for the finance department's request related to taking over the cash receipting and functions currently provided by APS in the first floor of the City Hall, the recommendation or the original recommendation was 2 full-time customer service reps. What we're proposing, the draft budget be revised to reflect 1 full-time position and 1 temporary customer service clerk, and that then the department will evaluate during this year, the first year of operations, whether that second position would be needed on a full-time basis or not. If so, whether if they need a full-time or they think they need an ongoing part-time situation, the department will come back in next year, during next year's either the budget process or mid-year to address that item. In addition, the message was that there's not a desire on the part of council at this point in time to move forward with starting to pre-fund self-insurance for health insurance. And that was based on that we have not begun the process to fully evaluate that and move forward and being prepared to move forward with a recommendation. And that was a $500,000 item. And then there was discussion about one of the themes that we heard last year in the budget process and that we hear is that we should finish what we've started. There was a lot of discussion about the tot lot or a children's playground at the Foothills Community Park. And so that item is proposed to be added to the draft budget for the CIP section. With those changes, there is a reduction in the number of positions that would be added through the draft budget. Just to kind of go over that, would now be a total of 17 positions, 16 of which would be general funded. And so essentially the position recommendations on this first page are the same as the prior, with the exception that there's one customer service representative instead of two. So that accounts for the reduction in the number of positions in the base or in the additions. And then the last section of the position ads was related to the police department. And it was suggested that I separate these between the sworn and non-sworn portions. So it's very clear to the public which are adding sworn police officer positions versus which are adding more administrative type positions. And so you'll see here the current draft budget includes the one squad of a sergeant and 5 police officers, the SRO sergeant and an investigator, and then the 2 positions, the telecommunication operator and the management assistant. I don't know if Brian wants to add anything.
Yes, Mayor, members of the council. It was also talked about last Monday night, the opportunity to add a second squad for the police department. We have done that evaluation. At this time, though, I would like our police chief to really talk about what was recommended before you. So I would ask for our police chief to come up here and address the council.
And may I add, let's hold the questions until he is finished with his presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. At last week's meeting, we had significant discussion on police staffing. You know, I just want to say, because I don't think I made it very clear last week, that I'm very thankful to council, very thankful to city management for any positions that are given to PD. We're very thankful for that. But I want to make it clear to everyone that all along, my recommendation has been for one complete patrol squad, the supervisor, and the specialty and support units that go with that for a total of 10 positions. That recommendation has not changed. You know, last week I talked about being strategic, and I mentioned our recruiting strategies. Currently, we have 6 officers going through field training process, and we've hired another 2 that will be starting soon. From the point we're now with the applications that we discussed last week, it will take 2 to 3 months to complete just the background processes on those. Once that is complete and officers are hired, we're looking at another 4 months before they go solo. So the recommendation of hiring one squad now and the next year will allow us to take our time in the hiring and training process and not to overburden our field training officers who are training those officers in the field. In addition, with the time it takes to hire and train several new officers, we'll be well into 2017 anyways. It will provide my hiring and recruitment employees time to catch up on other tasks and assignments that were put on hold while they've been continually doing backgrounds. Hiring one squad now will allow us to be strategic and implement a 4th squad on half of our patrol rotation and put that structure into place for as we go into the future. As I stated last week, we want to be a team with other city departments. I want to support my fellow directors, and I know that they have staffing and financial needs as well. So I stand by that original recommendation that's on the board with you tonight.
Any questions on this?
So is
Yes.
he not going to answer our question? I mean,
I just asked you, do you have any questions on this,
yeah.
on the police? You were late for the other, so
No,
that we
just
still
on the
got- we're
police.
still going to, she's still going to answer the questions for
Just
all
on
of
the police.
the first presentation. This is the second.
Yeah, just on the police.
So
is what
right
my
now,
question-
since the chief is up here, answer your questions to the chief, and what he has just talked about can be answered.
Well, my question is to the city manager.
Well, he's there too.
My question, Brian, is that I thought at our last meeting, we asked you if we were to decide for 2 squads, what would we have to take out of our budget? Now we've had the chief come and say he doesn't really want 2, he wants 1, and maybe 2 the next time. So does that mean you don't have an answer for us? And you're just asking him to come forward to reiterate that he only wants 1 squad, extra squad?
Mayor and Council Member Campbell, we absolutely looked at the how to go about bringing on a second squad. There was a lot of evaluation that went on that, discussions with the police chief, looking at the financials, and there is an ability to get that done. It would be difficult. Could it be done? Absolutely. After looking at that, our management's recommendation, the police chief's recommendation after going through all the discussion behind the scenes, and really with a lot of analytics to it, is to keep this recommendation on the table. So that's where we're at this point. And Lori, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that as well.
Yeah, there are certainly options that we could pursue. If that is the direction of council, we'd come back and provide you the
I just want to answer some constituents that have asked me why we're not doing 2 squads now. And I told them that I had asked the city manager to tell us what we would have to cut out of the budget if we added two squadrons or 2 squads. And I can't do that now other than saying you looked at it, and I mean, I don't have an answer.
Brian, can you just review who you met with, what departments
No,
met,
just what
and
would
how
we
they...
have to cut?
Well, there were substantial, we had to look at several things that we actually have, and if you have it, go ahead and show, because we can give you the background on it.
Yeah. Did
And
we
we
have to cut staff?
and we can certainly do that. So you will
Just
see
want
that.
an answer.
It's what would happen if we went to a second squad, and it'd be a partial second,
Okay.
it'd be partial squads.
All right.
Whoa.
It's out of control.
I'm glad you're running it, not me, because I wouldn't know what to do. So so one alternative that was developed as a way to fund a second squad was actually not a full second squad. So essentially the alternatives that we came up with as a potential option was, again, the change that we discussed in the finance department. We also discussed with the police chief another option rather than another full squad, but was the concept of creating 2 power squads, which would require us, which would be basically 2 squads with 1 sergeant and 3 police officers each. And then we would not add the management assistant position in the police department. In order to do that, we would reduce the operating costs set aside that we proposed for the value of those additional police positions that would be required, which would be 1 additional sergeant and 1 additional police officer over and above the current draft budget proposal. And then we would, instead of funding the police radio replacements in 1 year, we would then fund them over 2 years, similar to what's been done with the SCBAs in fire. We would remove the self-insurance, which was already a recommendation that we've placed before you, and then also add the tot lot. So that was an option through reviewing a number of potential areas to make changes that was developed.
Joe?
I just want to say I appreciate the recommendation. I know from setting the money aside for the O&M, and we've got a lot of things coming around the corner, that it probably makes sense to phase it in and make it a top priority next, so you have that first squad all set up. You have your routine already set and established. Now it takes less pressure on recruiting for another whole class and getting those up to speed as well. So I'm in support of, and it makes sense to me on your recommendation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Any other comments? Sherry?
Chief, I want to thank you. I think you know this whole council. We are very concerned, obviously, with officer safety and everything, and I will go with your recommendation. Like I said before, you've never come before and asked for things you don't need. You've always been very strategic. I am still concerned when you show that chart and some of the holes. I am still, that really does concern me. And just either for you or Brian, I'm not really sure if something happens and we find that the manpower isn't enough, is there anything we can do in the middle, or do we have to wait till next year?
I guess I can answer. Councilmember Loretano or Vice Mayor Loretano. It will be a challenge. I mean, we could do it. It would be a challenge.
You turned yourself on.
It would be a challenge to hire the personnel we need to, even if there was something for mid-year, we're still going to run into that same issue. The one squad and the 5 officers will be a great start to where we're going in the future. So.
Okay, no, I appreciate that, and you are the expert in this area, so I'm going with the expert on this. So thank you.
Joanne?
Thank you, Chief. And I do think, as the Vice Mayor stated, this is a council that thoroughly supports public safety and supports your officers. The question I asked you that night was reality. How will this, work for you with that many officers and training and recruiting and being able to hire? And so, it is said you are the expert, and we'll rely on that. But know that we're not going to wait if the added people are needed. That's something that we would find for you. So always understand that. I do have a question once everyone's gone around about the 17 positions. Lori, okay? Thank you.
Carolyn?
I just wanted to say, and Sherry said it very well, as did Joe, is that you are the expert, and I believe that if this is your recommendation, that I respect that and that I would support that.
No others, so I'd like to say thank you. It's always about a balance. And I appreciate you going back and thinking about the hiring and the training time of adding these on, and would they be on the street? So that does help. So I agree with everybody. We do care about our public safety. We do care about the long hours sometimes they have to work, and the demand from the public. And the demand public isn't always just danger. It's just they want them there for certain things. So it's they're all over. So we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Beg,
Yes. Yeah.
Can I just say, and beg them to stay well?
Brian?
Mayor, I would want to point out as well, so the strategy this year, just as a reminder to council, is we're doing half the operations set aside for police, but we're putting it on one-time projects or purchases with the intent of, and it does not obligate future council, certainly, but the strategy is we set half of that aside this year, and then it's a lot easier next year to get the other half to now go to a fully funded second squad. So did want to make sure that was still out there, and certainly for council to look at next year as well.
Thank you. Any other questions on the police? All right. Are you ready for questions on your presentation?
Certainly.
All right. Joe? I'm sorry, what?
Let Joanne go.
Oh, just at the beginning, just since we're going over the added positions, can you explain a little bit behind the $3 million ongoing for 17 positions? Because obviously that's not just salary. I would not assume.
You mean in terms of the total supplemental?
Right. You have $3 million ongoing. I can tell $5 million is one time being suiting up officers with cars, things like that. I'm sure that there are, investments.
Page 15.
What page is this? Yes.
Yeah, page 15, everybody.
So, but what does make up the ongoing?
So the ongoing, probably the easiest way to see it is if you move to the Schedule 11 that was included in this the packet that you received 2 weeks ago. And in there we show where those ongoing numbers come from. And so in addition to salaries, they are things like adjustments to base budgets for things like the jail expenses, Sonoran Valley services. There are also adjustments associated with some programs. I think there was a traffic signal painting program that would be an ongoing type of program. So it's not just staff that make our ongoing costs grow. So there are, as you scan through there, you can see a number of items that would be adding to those ongoing costs. One of the larger ones is that technical budget item I mentioned, which is the adjustment to when we experience property loss, the expense and then reimbursement from the insurance for property losses. So $230,000 of that amount is essentially associated with a technical budget correction to deal with property loss. And so those are the types of things. I don't know if that helps answer the question. Or
Somewhat, but some of the items I just didn't associate with the positions, and so that's why I wasn't real clear on that.
And they are not all associated with the positions that are recommended.
Okay.
Some of them are just other programs or other areas that we're recommending.
But on the
increases.
slide, you would assume that it was dealing strictly with positions. You wouldn't really, just because that's what it's right next to, you know.
Okay.
So, all right, thank you.
Other questions before she begins? Joe?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and I'm not asking for anything to be added in there, but when we talked about the SHA last meeting Monday, just something I wanted to clarify. One area that I should have brought up that I didn't cover was fairness, and I feel strongly about that. And I'm hoping that as council will consider that as we go forward, maybe not this budget year, but next budget year, is it was one of the benefits that all employees had before the downturn. Okay, and it was pretty much set aside money so that when you retire, it would help you offset your medical. And trust me, I've been there with my wife, et cetera. When you get older, your out-of-pocket's going to grow. I can tell you from experience. And it was a benefit. Then came the recession, and that was one of the things that were cut. Well, it wasn't that long ago, and again, we have a couple of associations that we negotiate with, is that our sworn officers got back that benefit. And they're both female and male sworn officers. So they have that benefit that was once afforded to all. And the only thing I'm asking the council to consider in the future is to be consistent and fair to all of our classes of employees, to maybe consider it next budget year so that all are playing on the same field. That's my soapbox, and that's all I have to say.
I'd just like to add to that. If you remember when we had the education, we stopped giving them the education. Well, one of the things that came up throughout the years since I've been on council was not everybody uses that. So it picks it, you know, if you're looking like that, okay, what can we do to benefit the entire employee system? That just did a certain segment of them. Not that it's wrong. I'm not saying it, no on it. I'm just telling you that if you're talking about that, that's when we start giving additional benefits. Are we looking at how many benefits, how many people or employees that benefits? And that's all I'm saying.
No, I'm just saying that they are afforded the opportunity to put into that system. I just think it's fair that the non-sworn should also have that same option. That's all.
That's a benefit.
Was that the $125,000
Yes,
ongoing, correct?
correct.
Mayor,
Bill?
you know, I have to agree with Joe, particularly on the, and it didn't really dawn on me while we were talking about it last week. We are creating a situation where those that can negotiate can get better benefits. And that was something that as a council we had always kind of unspoken, not necessarily by policy, but really had the belief that we weren't going to negotiate more for those that could negotiate compared to those that could not. So I would just as soon not wait until next year. And if there's a way to push that through now, that we start thinking about it now. Not everybody's going to contribute to the, and it's the retirement health savings, the RHS. Not everyone's going to contribute to that, but it is available to everybody. And not, Mayor, much like your example, not everyone's going to participate in the tuition reimbursement, but it is available. And right now, more than half of our employees do not have that even available to them. And if we're going to stick to our philosophy of trying not to negotiate or give away give benefits to those that are negotiating, we really kind of have an obligation to do it. And if we're freeing up some funding with some other areas, this may be something that we consider doing for all the employees.
Sherry?
I understand your point. I just don't think in this budget year, for me anyway, this is the time when I see so many other needs that we're not fully meeting at this point. Although public safety do have the meet and confer, public safety is a little different. They do have that meet and confer. And then if we start every single benefit that everybody has, I think we'd be in this circle and we'd never get things done because we have a list of things that we need to take care of for our citizens and get towards our citizens. I think we did a good step for returning the tuition amount to the employees. And for me, I think that's a good thing to start with this year. And then maybe as things go on and we can fully fund some of these other areas that we haven't been able to fund, then I'd be more than happy to look at it. But for me, it's just not in this cycle.
Thank you. Next, anybody else? Okay. I have to agree with Sherry, so if you're looking for consensus. Joanne?
I'm going to have to think about that one. I appreciate both positions, and it was certainly something that I always intended is that we wanted there to be fairness, and I have to think about it.
So are we ready for continuation?
Yes.
Okay, Lori, you have the floor.
All righty. So what we'll do now is go into the 10-year CIP. And we've had a couple conversations with you already about the CIP. And so this is coming forward with your feedback and suggestions through those processes. So the CIP, and just by way of reference in your former materials, the Schedule 9 has the portion of the CIP that is proposed for inclusion in next year's budget. So in other words, the first year of the CIP. And it's $45.2 million. By way of comparison, last year, or for this year's budget, the CIP was $35.6 million before the carryovers. The key changes in terms of why this year might be higher, the primary reason for that is that the water and wastewater rate plans are now incorporated, and you'll see there's $13.8 million in water bonds projects. So that's the key reason. There are obviously other reasons, and the CIP is the kind of thing that it's project-based, so it will vary from year to year due to the nature of the projects that are involved. This is just a graphic presentation of the 10-year CIP, basically kind of showing you by major program area what makes up that CIP. That big bright bar in the middle is the water projects. So the water program is the bulk of the CIP, and that is the program that's been approved through the rate plan. What some of the things not reflected in here are the facilities master plan that you've recently discussed and reviewed, because that process was not yet a plan that was approved by the council. It was not rolled into this year's CIP process. That would move into next year's CIP process. There are a few projects that were facilities-related plans that are projects that are recommended independent of that plan having been approved. In addition, the work that is going on right now with the water information master plan that is beyond the work that was done for the rate plan is not yet complete, and that is also still in development. But essentially the major funding sources again for the CIP are impact fees, the addition of the water and wastewater bonds, and then there are also GO bonds that have been reprogrammed so that we're recommending there is no longer the City Hall facility, and there are other projects in here using those GO bonds. We'll start by going through the existing projects that are, in other words, projects that were already in the CIP that are included in next year in FY17. Pavement management is funded at $1.8 million in the recommendation. Last year, there was the council desired to advance the Saraville project from I-10 to Portland area or Van Buren. That project required that the council approved essentially using a general fund loan to advance that impact fee funded project. We are rebudgeting that project because it does have a carryover involved with it. And as part of the analysis, we've gone ahead and reduced the amount of the loan, the general fund loan that's required based on our forecast of impact fees collected to date and those we expect to collect next year. So that is reduced from $1.7 million in general funds to $1 million in general funds. The $700,000 difference would go to the impact fees. And then the repayment of that loan from the impact fees program the year after that. And then the public art program at its $60,000 a year allocation is also continues in the CIP. Removed from the CIP is the recreation center in terms of general fund. We did, and this is a slight change from the last presentation. Again, this was an item that was included. It just wasn't, your attention wasn't drawn to it. We did recommend that we go ahead and use $100,000 of the amount that was originally budgeted for the recreation center to fund the site plan for the 100-acre property or the 100-acre site. We're recommending the use of the general funds here rather than the bond funds because there were no other GO bond fund projects that would be going forward this year. And so it would make sense just to use the general funds that were budgeted for that project rather than start a GO bond process this early. There will be adequate projects later on to pick those up. New general funded projects included in the draft budget in the CIP for next year are listed here. I'll draw all of these except the first one and the note at the bottom were reviewed with you when we talked about the CIP in March. The first one that's listed here, the $1.7 million for developer and other participation in streets projects, that is that item I discussed when we talked about the revenue piece where we have a large increase in miscellaneous revenue. This is the case where we already have money in our hands that has been received from developers or others for specific projects. An example would be if a developer was required to put in a half street, we may have taken a payment in lieu of them doing that half street. So we have those resources on hand to do that half street. And it appears from talking to the development community that some of these projects may move forward next year. So we've added a $1.7 million project, and it's offset by assuming that $1.7 million we have in hand will become revenue rather than sitting in an account as a liability. The other project on here that is new is the mention at the bottom, which was the addition of the $120,000 for the tot lot at the Foothills Community Park.
I think we're waiting questions till the end.
In terms of the GO bonds, the projects that are included are the Recreation Center at $13 million. And the GO bond funding would begin in 18 and would expand through 21. The Aquatic Center and then also the Community Park. The Community Park is primarily impact fee funded, but to advance it to occur earlier will require that we potentially use some of the GO bonds to finance the advancement of that project. And there could be some inflationary, again, the impact fee program did not provide for inflation. And depending on the timing of when the park project goes forward and what may happen with the proposed impact fee study, we may have an inflationary increase to address in that project as well. The other GO bond funded recommended project is advancing and funding the non-impact fee eligible portions of the police operations phase 2 facilities. There is a portion of that project that is not growth related and would not be eligible for impact fees. And we estimate that at approximately $3 million. And then again, similar to what I mentioned on the park project, advancing the impact fees would also need to be financed with bonds. We would wait until the budget year prior to those advancements to again see what impact fee collections look like and determine how much of the financing would be. So the actual financing that would be required is still to be determined. And just a reminder, when we come forward with the tentative budget, we will bring forward the financial policies. And this is an area where a financial policy would need to be changed. Currently, we have the financial policy at setting the maximum combined rate at $1.60 before issuing debt or GO bonds. So the discussion was $1.74 if we round to the nearest penny. And since this, what we've called the gathering place projects or the projects at the 100-acre sites has been a little hard to follow in some cases, we thought we'd lay this out here for you so you could kind of see the projects that are involved and the timeline. So in FY17, the CIP proposes funding the 100-acre site plan, and that's both that $100,000 in general fund and $50,000 in impact fees for the community park portion. In FY18, or the next year, the recreation center design would be funded, is proposed in the CIP. In FY19, the recreation center construction, the aquatic center design, and the 30-acre park design would be proposed as moving forward in that year. In 20, the recreation center is an approximate one-year construction project, so that project could open sometime in fiscal year 20. And then in fiscal year 20, construction of the aquatic center and construction of the 30-acre park could begin. The aquatic center is also about a one-year construction project, and the 30-acre park about an 18-month project, which would make it possible for those two projects to open sometime in fiscal year 21. And so when we developed the operating cost set aside, or the anticipated operating cost set aside, those are the timelines that we took into consideration in developing that as well. So that was kind of the review of what's in the first year of the general fund CIP, as well as the gathering place project. The other changes that have been proposed in the draft CIP from the most currently adopted one in the middle years, or in the years from not years 2 through 10, are that, and you'll be discussing late at your regular meeting, I believe you'll be reviewing the public art plan. One of the items that is proposed in the CIP is to up that amount to $75,000, and that would occur when we add the 10th year to the plan. Pavement management, we identified funding to fund pavement management at $1.8 million for all years in the 10-year, with 2 exceptions. FY20, it's at $1.6 million, and in FY22, it's at $1 million. And then last year we started a program to try to start planning to fund 1 warranted traffic signal a year. We were able to add a warranted traffic signal in fiscal year 18 and in 26, but the middle years are not funded. And so again, we did that by some of the changes that happened primarily relative to the recreation center. We took the funds that were originally programmed for the recreation center and reallocated it to address these items that the council has identified as a priority in the CIP previously. The other major portion of the proposed CIP are the water and wastewater projects. And again, I just want to emphasize that these are the additions here are the projects that are supported by the 5-year rate plan that was adopted earlier this fiscal year. That adds $38.7 million in water bond-funded projects, and it adds $7.5 million in wastewater bond-funded projects and $4.8 million in new enterprise-funded wastewater projects. And then primarily the balance of the water and wastewater CIP are their impact fees. And with that, we can discuss the CIP if you'd like.
Thank you. Who would like to be first? Joe?
For the record, and just to make sure it captured in the notes, my position has not changed on the right-of-way mediums, Litchfield Road, south of Western Improvements, the $212,000. I firmly believe that improvement benefits more a county island, which is to the right, and as you go down the road a little farther, a nice big parking lot that used to be where Lockheed used to park. To me, that's an improvement to that building. I'm a firm believer to make those improvements. I would consider it if that property decided to annex within the city. But from my position, that is not a good expenditure of city funds because I think it benefits people, property that are not in the city. Also, the one that deals with the pavement management, I notice that's decreasing as it gets out. Fiscal year 20, fiscal year 22. Is there a reason why that's dropping? Is for some reason the demand for our roads, I would think, are going to grow by then because our roads are going to be older. We're going to have more to maintain. I would think that would be going up, not going down.
Mayor, council member, the goal is to fund that at $3 million a year, of which $1.8 million is in the CIP and $1.2 is in the operating budget for the department. We were constrained by the forecast when we prepared the forecast for the one-time funds. Okay. We constrained the CIP to its current general funding levels in order to leave some capacity for other one-time projects in the future. So there just were not adequate funds in the forecast for FY20. We fell short $200,000 from meeting the goal of the $3 million in combined number. And in FY22, we fell short of $800,000. So as we move forward in future CIP processes, we would continue to look for opportunities to also get those years up to the combined $3 million a year. It was just a lack of resources, not a lack of desire to fund.
So the desire still hit the $3 million. We just may have to figure out where the additional money is coming from.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Bill?
Back to the right-of-way, I was not here in March for the CIP discussion. The last CIP discussion that I participated in was the one in January, and this project was not on there. When I went back and looked at the presentation from March, it was in there before this council discussed it. So I guess I'm looking for a little background on how did something that hadn't been discussed in the previous council retreats, et cetera, end up back in here, and then what was the result of the conversation that this stays? Because this was taken out a year ago, it was not in, put back in, now here we sit.
Mayor, council members, the CIP is, let me review the CIP process, and I think that'll help answer your question. The CIP process involves, the CIP we already have adopted, and reviewing it to see if it still makes sense and recosting it if necessary. It involves getting your feedback on your project ideas, which we did in January. But it also involves the departments requesting projects that they believe are of value or should be considered. So the information that was brought forward in March included the council ideas where the departments had gone through and evaluated the cost and that type of thing. But it also included the items we specifically had identified at the retreat, items that had previously been removed from the CIP. So some of those items were added back for consideration through the CIP discussion, and then it had some new items that had not been presented previously because departments had identified those through the process. So the March presentation was about all the ideas that had been accumulated through numerous processes. It was not a recommendation. It was just, here are all the requests that we know of. And here they were in comparison to what was already in the CIP. It was not a recommendation. It was an information-seeking session.
Okay, so I guess I have to ask the rest of my fellow council members then. Did we add this back as a group in March, or was this just left on in the thing? Because we've already taken it out once. So I'm curious how it ended up back in. I heard how it got back in. It came through staff, but did we say yes to something we'd previously taken out?
Mayor, council member, if I can add, this
Yes,
is
you do.
us coming back based on our ability to fund items, information. That we did not go through a intense consensus-seeking conversation at the retreat in terms of some of the smaller CIP projects. A lot of the time at the retreat was spent on gaining consensus on the bond portion of the program. So that is why we're here today, is to come back to you, having presented you the ideas. This is our recommendation, and we're looking for your, again, similar to what we said when we started the session last week. This is here for you to provide us feedback, and we'll certainly respond to what we hear from you.
Do
Okay.
you want to hear the reason why they brought that back in? Do you want staff to answer that? Because
No, I don't know that I want to. I
Okay,
guess
okay.
so. Let me. I figured it was I missed something in the process.
yeah.
And it doesn't sound like I missed anything. So that was the genesis of where my questions came from. Now, having said all of that, I guess I'm somewhat surprised that when the council removes something from the CIP, that it comes back as another staff recommendation. I'm kind of surprised to see it that way, rather than through a discussion. It just popped up on the list. I would have thought it would have been part of the discussion. I remember sitting right here looking at all the pieces of paper taped on the desks, that would have been one of those projects that we had discussed in January. Now, granted, the retreat process this year was very disjointed, and we started with part of this discussion in, I think, December, and then we came back again in February.
It was not
January.
a well-run retreat.
So that may be part of it, but here we sit, and I share Joe's concern about beautifying an area of the city that is not ours. That, with the exception of some of the parking lot, which is in the city, all of that is County Island. And whether or not that property gets filled, I don't think is going to be dependent upon the quality of the media, and especially given the way we've let other medians in our city go. And we just talked about, we don't want to fund this, we don't want to do that because there's other needs that the residents have. This does not even serve the residents. Residents don't even drive through it. People who live in Avondale, and we've got one business down there, the rest is not even ours. So I'm struggling with that, and I realize we don't do line item stuff, but I am absolutely not in favor of that particular item. And I don't know that that's just my opinion. The other one that I actually have a question on is the fire station renovation at $1.2 million. We have just been told about a potential problem at that facility, which may or may not impact the ability for us to even renovate. So if it's determined that 1.2 is what it's going to take to remediate a potential problem there, are we going to have a discussion about that entire facility, about whether its length? I mean, it's the oldest building, I think, built in 94 or something.
Ryan, can you address
93,
that, please?
so.
1993, yes, Councilmember. So the strategy, we have the funding in there to do the renovation, and we are looking at, there are some issues. It's an older building, it's 1993, hence the reason for putting in the renovation dollars to really bring it up to more usable current standards. There are some issues in there. We're having those evaluated now. And so as we look at that, we're looking at what costs might be involved in any remediation efforts that are going on. So if you would like more information on it, I can have Fire Chief come up here, or Wynette. But the other part of that is when we do assuming the fire station study, and it's in the budget or consensus budget at this point, as we go through that whole strategy of looking where fire stations are located and really how that may impact where we do locations and really how we look at some of the longer term operations as far as facilities and locations. The renovations would happen after that study is completed. So there wouldn't be renovation dollars being put toward that until after that study's done, but there would be remediation dollars going toward it. And Lynette or Chief, I don't know if we have any current estimates as far as what that might cost.
You want the chief to come up and talk about that? Bill?
No,
Well, maybe you might. I'm
Yeah.
going to say yes because I just think some of his questions have created more questions. So if you don't mind, Chief.
and before you, my generic question on this was, I hate for us to spend 1.2 on a facility that may or may not meet our needs. A, B, what did you call it? Remediation may be part of the solution in the short term as we wait for the long-term answer. So I don't know if there's even a question in there. So
Chief, you have the floor.
Thank you. So it's a collaborative effort right now between the fire department and facilities and obviously the city manager's office looking at Fire Station 181. We have a contractor in there now doing some evaluations of environmental studies and issues that are occurring in the station. We're supposed to have one of our first report outs tomorrow afternoon. So we'll get in a little bit more information, but as far as costs, we don't have any idea of what that cost would be right now. So hopefully we'll gain a little more information tomorrow and be able to report that back to the city manager.
So this station is 20, I'm trying to do the math in my head, 23 years old. Was never built to be a career fire station. It was built to be a volunteer station. And then it was, oh, by the way, let's throw these bunk rooms in that little hallway area, and they dug it out, and that was after the fact. If you've been there, you know the area that I'm talking about. So the functionality of it has become problematic, and now we've got potentially a mold situation. And that building has been leaking probably since day one anyway from the roof. So there's really not a surprise. So I guess if we're placeholdering 1.2, that's just a lot of money to seem to tie up, and especially if we're not going to take any action on it until after the study, which we know we aren't going to have done until the FY17 fiscal year. We're not going to certainly even do anything until FY18. Does it make sense to tie up 1.2 right now as opposed to tying up 1.2 of carryover in 18 to 19? I guess philosophically I'm looking at that. That's a big number.
Mayor, council member, the concept was that we were looking at the potential renovation. It was an idea that came through the process as we worked with the council on the retreat. From my perspective, the project could need to go forward next year, and we would be better prepared to have the resources and the appropriation available to deal with whatever we may learn. But that obviously we would need to evaluate what we would do based on what it looks like the longer term scenario is.
I'm just responding to what the manager said about we're not going to do anything at that station until after the study is done. So we don't get the study back until March. Then we say, okay, well, we can renovate. I don't see us spending $1.2 million between March and the end of June.
It's just like asset management. We put money away. We aren't going to do it till next year.
So if that's the theory, then I guess that's the theory.
I disagree always with that theory. I agreed with what we ended up at that last meeting, that the study would come. We'd find out from the study. I certainly have concerns for our firefighters in there. I'm glad we're taking action, and they are taking action, and so I feel very comfortable about that. But I just don't feel like eliminating a fire station at this point. Just eliminating. It is a building. Like any other building, and look how long they had the old police department. Look how long everybody sat in that building that was really old. So I'm not ready to cross that off the map right now until we have information, and I would feel really badly if we found out it wasn't needed, and there we are next year needing the money without the study and anything else. So that's my position. Anybody else? Wally?
So, Chief, have you moved everyone out of that building?
Yes, we've
Completely?
moved all the fire department personnel as well as support personnel that are in there. So everybody's out of that building.
Okay, I don't know that our public really knows all of this, and I'm just trying to give them a little background because they're going to hear this conversation and then say, oh, well, what's wrong with the I haven't seen it in the newspaper,
No.
So if you could just give us a little background, that'd be great,
Sure.
please.
It was a few months ago, some of our employees were noticing that they had some environmental allergies while they were at the station. And we contracted with a company to come in and do a study and evaluate. They found some minor issues that were able to be corrected while the crews were in the stations without any impacts to them whatsoever. Those issues continued even after some of the corrections were made by the facilities department. And we actually brought in another group to look at that as well. And this is all done in collaboration with the Public Works and Facilities Division. And they found some additional issues with water and also with some environmental issues they wanted to look at some more. So we felt it best because employees were still having some concerns and some reactions, headaches, and allergy-type symptoms. So we felt it best just to move everyone out of there until we fully determined exactly what the cause was. So as I stated earlier, tomorrow will be the first kind of look to see what we're dealing with and try to determine what the plan is going forward at that point. But they've been out of that station for almost about a month, 3 weeks to a month at this point.
And
Yep, correct.
Chief, they're at 184.
That's correct. We moved the ladder west to Fire Station 184, which is at Yuma and Saraville.
Sherry?
I'm okay with leaving the 1.2 in there for now. Obviously, if we don't use it, we can just carry it over for the renovations or what needs to be done if the building can be saved. I don't know from what you're saying, and I guess when we get more information to find out exactly what needs to be done. So just for the fire station, I'm okay of leaving that one in there right now.
Any other comments?
Well, if we can save the building, I'd like us to save the building. I mean, that's
Oh, yeah.
that's a big deal. It may take more than 1.2 million, but at least we'll have a start. So.
Well,
Joe?
Just a minute.
Yeah, I don't have a problem leaving it in there. My only concern is on the remediation when you get it back. You got a study that's going to be done in March. What if the study comes back and says that station should be 2 miles west to better serve the area? Then you got 1.2, and assuming that you can fix the building where people don't get sick. You don't know that yet until you get the report back. So my only concern is spending, the money unless they feel really comfortable that that's going to fix the health issue, until you figure out with your report that comes back that maybe that station needs to be closed and relocated somewhere else for efficiency. That would be my only concern, but I'd keep the money in there.
Joanne?
I think strategically that's probably the best thing is to be looking at what's it going to take to fix it? Is it in the proper place? I would say leave the money there for this year also. For these other items that have been discussed, I mean, I can go on. I don't know that you were finished, Bill. You were done? That was your okay. There are, and Chief, thank you. That was... There are other items that I view of importance to our citizens prior to the right-of-way in front of Lockheed. However, I understand why it's there. We have a slow, I hate to say demise, from our southern I-10 heading down Litchfield. And I can understand the reasoning and the strategy to try to upgrade a look and trying to salvage what we can in what was at one time. What do you call that? The information security, whatever those letters that stand for. We went to McCain and Flake and talked about that area within Lockheed, because it has a
We're
special
talking about
GIS 4 or something. I don't know what it was. I don't remember. But
cybersecurity.
cybersecurity. I understand.
There was a
Yes, the strategy behind it, and I am very concerned for our southern end of Litchfield going down, and so I do see the reason. Now I'm going to ask something of you, Rourke. We found out Friday of a settlement that could come into play financially for us. So, with that amount, and I don't know.
understand those words.
Would you say you found out
The
Friday?
settlement that
Or
we
settlement.
settlement.
Sorry, we missed the word settlement.
Sorry, settlement. Okay, so how that plays into this next year, because we also had within the CIP an additional, $600,000 that was for somewhat of the ERP. So that does offset some of that monies that we have been told about. So when we come back to the tot lot for Estrella, when we come back to the coverings for the tot lots in other parts of our city, which I know Nathan told us last week that 2 were going to be covered, but there was a third one sitting out there for the next year. Well, you know what? No. That needs to be taken care of before landscaping in front of Lockheed, is my feeling about it. We know that our citizens, back to that pickleball or back to some other amenities within parks, have been asked. So there's a lot of balls to be juggled, and we need to, I think, prioritize some things. My other concern as to, I just have a question for clarification on slide 40. You have under new CIP projects, you have police phase 1, $750,000. That's not a carryover. That's new.
Correct. That is, Mayor, Council Member, that is funding that was mistakenly left out of the CIP. It was previously funded with the project. It did not get carried over into this year, so we are restoring the funding to the project at its original level.
missed that when we weren't here.
Okay. All right. My feelings about the timeline, the Gathering Place timeline, I think that if there was a way to do the design and the build of the park with the rec center would be the most beneficial. I know that you've talked about bonding. You stated that impact fees are what was going to be paying for the construction of the park, correct?
Correct. The park portion is impact fee funded.
But you could do the bond in the same way that you were saying that we would be doing something else rather than bonding. Was it the rec center?
Mayor, Council Member, the park is already being advanced in this proposal from where the impact fees are capable of funding it. And so we are already assuming that there will be some need to finance advancement of the impact fees to get the park to its current location. I think there was also discussion, because this was co-constructing and co-opening these facilities was discussed by the council in March and or at the retreat. Staff and management did go back and look at the feasibility of our ability to implement that. And part of the recommendation here, it's not about the financial availability of the bonds, because those could be available to us. From my understanding and my discussions and involvement, it is more about our ability to actually implement the projects and not create a situation where we create expectations and then cannot meet them.
Okay, all right, I appreciate that. I guess my last concern or statement regarding CIP is that we've talked about the second squad. It's about the ongoing is what I'm concerned about. We've talked about the second squad. We've looked at the CIP of a new fire station being way out in, I think it was 2022, which I believe is even after the study. I mean, it truly seems far too far out there in timing. And then we also are talking about the rec center and the park. And so my biggest concern is that we are not going to have the ongoing funding for the positions that it's going to take to fill all these slots. And my biggest worry and concern is that we're going to go ahead and say, because we want that rec center, we want that park, we want that aqua, or whatever you called it, the aquatic center. Thank you. And we're going to be talking about these things, and then that study's going to come out on that fire station. Then it's going to be, oh yeah, it really needs to be here in 2019, and that's where I'm worrying about all these positions. So I appreciate the 1.25 that you've already set aside, but I still wonder if that's even going to scratch the tip of the iceberg of what we need. So that's kind of where I'm sitting right now.
Next. Sherry?
Okay, I got about 3 or 4 just to kind of go over. First of all, with the pavement management, I do agree with Joe, because I know this is an issue that I appreciate that we're going to try to fund up to this $3 million, because clearly, our roads are deteriorating. So I think that's important, that we try to keep that as we can up to a level to keep the roads at least to the level they're at, so that we don't have to spend more as they're going up. I also agree with Joanne when we're talking about our timeline of the projects. I would love to see it quicker. Obviously, I think we all would like to see it quicker and online, because that's something we've been promising for a while. So I'm glad we're at least starting to move forward in that area. When we talk about the right-of-way, I guess my concern is I understand the need to improve the right-of-ways in some areas and the look of our city, but we have other areas that we're actually trying to market and really trying to get people to. So for me, I think our focus needs to be more on those areas rather than this one strip for $212,000 far south. So I agree with Bill, but I do disagree. We do have residents who drive through there, because that's the way we go up to the mountain. So we do have a lot of our residents who drive up there, but it just seems like a lot with all the other needs. If I was to prioritize, I'm not saying it's something we just should never do or something. Just right now, when I'm looking at the other needs, we've talked about making Bullard a gateway and some of the other areas that we've really wanted to bring economic development to. So for me, I'd rather focus on those and maintaining some of those other right-of-ways and some of those other projects that we were talking about as well. My last concern, this is actually my question, the stoplight issue. That's obviously been an issue for a while. So there's none funded in that period of time at all?
Mayor, council member, there are, for next year, we're recommending 2 traffic signals, one known and one for the warranted program. And then as we add on the years at the end, we're adding a signal on the years on the end. It's the same constraint that we have for pavement management. In the middle right now, there's just not forecasted resources to support funding those items. Our practice is to present a funded CIP or a fundable CIP so that we don't create expectations that projects will be there and then we get to that point in time and find the funds are not available. We do have a history of having much more one-time funds and our practice generates one-time funds. So as you see in preparing this year's CIP, we were able to add that warranted traffic signal that wasn't part of the adopted CIP, and the same with the pavement management. More than likely, our current practice will result in those funds becoming available as we move forward. Obviously, it will be at the discretion of the council at the time that comes forward.
Yeah, and go ahead. Sorry.
And on the traffic signals, just wanted to add to that. There's been discussion at the council level as far as there are other less expensive signals that we can put up. That analysis is going on. We will be bringing that back to council likely in September, because then we'll be going into the engineering standards, the update of those design standards that you'll have before you probably first part of next year, calendar year. But council will see options for how do we reduce costs for signals. And if that's the case, then there's a good chance we could bring some on sooner perhaps.
And I'll just say I've seen some of the pictures before when Rebecca presented. Some of those were actually, in my personal opinion, more aesthetically pleasing than some of the big ones. So, but I appreciate that. So I guess my thoughts are that if that 212, maybe there's someplace else to move that might be a little bit better. Some of those other unmet needs.
Next, Wally?
I have a question, Lori. In the CIP, are we planning on the asset management of the police and fire radios that we have to totally get new radios by 2020?
Mayor, council member, the asset management recommendations for both police and fire are built on their 10-year asset replacement plans. And in the recommendations for asset management, not in the CIP, but in asset management, the current draft budget would fully fund the upcoming replacement of the police radios. The fire radios, I don't recall where they fall in the process, but they are addressed in their, they would be addressed in their asset management plan as well. But this draft budget fully funds the anticipated cost of the upcoming police radio replacements.
All at once?
Correct.
Okay, that's good. I was just recently at a meeting and talked with some folks from RWC who told me that we were going to have this expense by 2020 because we had gotten an extension for 2 years. So I just want to be sure. I don't want the council, whoever is sitting here in 19 and 20, to be worried how we were going to pay for them because we have to get them.
If you approve this budget, you will be taking care of that for those future councils.
Thank you.
Joe?
Just a couple comments on back to the fire station. That probably in 17 we'll have an idea of where they're going to have to be. What I'm hoping is before that time comes, that staff is looking at applying some resources with our development partner south of the city to try to work to negotiate some type of framework and down the road of how they may be partnering with us to help us in mitigating fire service in that area. So I realize it's probably going to be a challenge, but it's probably never too early to at least start the discussion. I realize they work off of a budget like we do, but that doesn't mean it has to be tomorrow. But it would be nice to have a framework and an idea where that money possibly could be coming from and then what kind of money we're looking at to fund these stations, because that all becomes part of it. So I'm hoping that we'll be looking at that and working in that direction. As far as the asset management is concerned, give me just kind of refresh my memory. We had a lot of different pieces that we were looking at and studying. Are we pretty close to having the amount of money that we're putting aside routinely each fiscal year to cover those costs down the road? Or is there any other components that we're still studying to make it complete?
The Mayor, council member, the components that we're still studying are the facilities area, because that area was under development and being reviewed this year. And then we're also working on the component associated with the software side of technology. We've addressed the hardware side of technology. And then we are also exploring if there are any areas within the traffic signal system, if there's a need to have any kind of asset management funding there. But the major areas of roads or streets, technology, hardware, fleet is a large one. Parks right away and the ballpark and then the police and fire are all now addressed. And the funding recommended in the 17 draft budget is on the higher end than will be needed on a long-term basis because of some of the catch-up or the funding these big quickly coming up radios. So as we move forward, some of the dollar amounts that are recommended to go into those reserves will be reduced in a few years from now based on the plans that we have.
And I appreciate that. I remember in 2009 first coming on when we had the Great Recession, and I think we had about $250,000 at that point in reserves because some of it, I guess, had gotten drawn down as a result of some of our challenges. And I personally think this council, one of the greatest accomplishments is setting up that fund, because now it's not fighting for new money when it comes in, and we don't allow our equipment and items within the city to deteriorate, or roads to a point where it costs actually more money to replace. So again, I really appreciate all the efforts of staff bringing that up to speed and then setting it so it straight lines as opposed to the peaks and valleys in there. So, I think that's great to have that particular program in place, and I appreciate you working with us to get that done. And I think long term, that's going to be one of our great assets that people look back at, that we had the foresight to do that. And again, thank you. I appreciate it.
Sherilyn?
Well, I just want to comment on the right-of-way. I think I have a little bit different perspective than my colleagues, and I see some people are not surprised. And I'd just like to present now, whether or not it's county or the city of Goodyear, it really doesn't matter, because the perception is that it's Goodyear. And as people, as you say, people are going to their homes, or people are going to the airport, or people are that's what they see, and they don't see anything but that it's Goodyear. So I think we have to be aware of that, as well as the fact is we have a huge property that is in the process of changing hands. I mean, we're selling to a lot of companies. Yeah, we're transitioning at that former Goodyear Aerospace building. Obviously no longer, but I just think we have to be aware of that, and that it doesn't matter what the reality is as far as that right-of-way is concerned. The fact of the matter is, people think that it's Goodyear, and we have to show pride in our city, which is our mantra through the whole rest of the city. But you can't just turn your back on that piece because of the very strange situation that occurs there due to how our boundaries were drawn. So those are my points with that I think you have to see the image part of it.
Thank you, Sherilyn, because you took my steam out. Oh, it's great. No, I'm so glad you did. I continually address this. This is about economic development. This is about jobs. This is about bringing companies in. Bullard is the same way, the entryway to the airport, same way. Old Town or historical Goodyear, that corner. We have people continually coming in and looking at that property. They're going to bring people, they're going to hire people who live in the city of Goodyear. It's jobs, it's income. We have to give economic development a little bit more. We have to give them our love and cooperation and excitement about building our city with new companies and jobs. And we keep killing it. Each of these meetings, nope, don't trust this, won't get our money back, won't get our money back on that, won't get our money back. Let's take some risk here. It's a good risk to take. It's jobs. So I just appeal to this council to rearrange your thinking a little bit, and we give a great deal to the public. And I hear about, we got to do this, got to do this. We are doing so much for the public. They're number one on the list. Look at all the things we're doing for the public, a lot of the money we're putting. Well, let's do a little bit more. Let's put some money in their pockets. Let's give them some jobs. Let's get them off of I-10, I-17, 303. Let's put them to work in our city. The only way we're going to do it is to fund economic development and to go along with some of the streets, the entryways, make it look nice. We've already had studies on it. What did the study come out? The study came out that we're not looking like we're in business. When you go to those properties and they're being shown, they look like they're just not taken care of. That you're not thinking about putting a business there because you don't want to put a monument, you don't want to do the road, you don't want to put some shrubbery around. So if you do that and you continue this thinking, then don't ask economic development why companies aren't coming, why they're not attracted to that piece of land. We have a responsibility to make that look premier. And that's all I have to say about the budget. Go ahead.
Mayor, I know there's been a lot of dialogue on that particular section of roadway. Only thing I want to bring to council's attention, this was put back on there at the request of economic development. And the reason for it is there are a lot of looks at that section now. A few things going on there. Luxera is doing an expansion for the fixed base operator there's a good chance that Kitchell Development will do another project there at airport and once you get into the entrance of the airport on City of Phoenix property, which is in our city limits. But the other is the points are well made about the county island where former Lockheed Martin was, and totally understand that. It would be benefiting that property, certainly. That being said, that property, Lockheed Martin's property lease expires in June. So that opens up a lot of office buildings there. There are a lot of companies looking at that, a lot of executives that are touring the county island to perhaps go into those facilities. And right now, they haven't been able to go in there until Lockheed's lease expires. Now, Lockheed will stay there with their synthetic aperture radar group, and then also in flight operations, I want to say estimated 60, maybe 70 jobs that will stay behind. But the facility itself is being looked at or will be looked at a lot because it's the only office space that we have available in large contiguous areas. We're also looking at working with a developer across the street by Cooks and Doors for that to develop as well. So yes, it benefits the county island, the owner of the Lockheed former Lockheed Martin property, but the other it is a gateway into the airport. So that's why economic development looked at it.
Joanne?
First of all, Rourke, I'm sorry I never did get your answer unless would you like to say something?
No, I don't think it really had I think it's more of a management answer. Yeah, there's some funding available from that resolution, but it's one-time funds, and it's up to the council to allocate however they'd like.
Okay.
And if I may, to Rourke's point, the use of that would be is proposed to be for ERP. We know we're very close on the funding with what we have now, and this would help to ensure that we stay within our ability to go forward with that.
Well, I think we need to have that conversation once we understand that better, because we're within this budget, we're putting more money towards the ERP. So I think that needs to be hashed out. It doesn't have to be tonight, but I think that needs to be discussed. I will say I would negotiate. You cover that third tot lot this year, I would be in line to have.
Blackmail?
No, it's called negotiation.
Oh, okay.
I'd be willing to. I told you, I'm concerned about Litchfield Road South. And I do think we have some new companies around the airport and around, Cooks and Door, it's worthy of putting that in there. I hear you 100%, Bill, about it being a county island. I get that. But
Joe,
I apologize. I get that. But it is, to Sherilyn's point, it is our city, and I believe in the broken window theory, and it's something that we need to address. And so, but you give me that tot lot cover first, and that's my feeling. I do have a totally different question, though, and this goes back to a policy that was voted upon years ago, and you and I may be the only ones that were on this council at the time, and that's the 1% for art. And I have heard over the years, I think, differing opinions of what that is. Because originally, what I thought the 1% for art was back to if a capital project was built within the city that was a fire station or the library or a police station, whatever, admin building. 1% of that fund, 1% of that project was supposed to go to an art piece. Now, looking at the upcoming item within the next meeting and looking at this, I don't quite see the correlation of that 1% being spent for, yes, I don't know that I'm confused now as to what that policy is.
Brian, would you address that?
And I'd actually ask Nathan if he can come forward as well. I think it's Nathan that can help address this as well. So there is the policy in place now, and it does go back several years, and I'm going off of memory as well. It's up to 1% of that project that would benefit that. So, for example,
and that's fine, up to 1, but it's
so. For example, the police station, police ops building will have an art component to it as well. So it is you're right, it's our public facilities are being constructed that would have the artwork. bit up to 1% of that project
But
cost.
no, I understand. However, I guess the question is, though, are we funding it within the building's budget, or are you trying to put it into the art and culture's budget? That's where I'm getting confused, because it should be with the project rather than going.
Nathan, would you like to address that?
Yes, I will, Mayor, Councilmember Osborne. Right now, there are components in both areas, in both the project and the public art for city projects, but I would say primarily is the funding is within the arts budget. And so, while the ordinance does read up to 1%, what we're trying to do, and you'll get in the presentation tonight with the art plan that's coming forward from the Arts Commission, is looking to how do we increase that when we're bringing on larger facilities, such as building capacity within the program to accommodate more significant art pieces to go along with these new facilities that are coming online.
I see two different things here, and I feel like we're trying to put it all into one area so that the building doesn't get. I'll have to see how you present it then. I'll watch for that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Where it's about 5 minutes to 6, and when the meeting ends, I'm going to give them a break before we go into the next meeting. So
I'll make it. I'll make it quick. From Councilmember Osborne's question on the funding, it's my understanding you got about $18 million of a appropriation buffer in there. So if we got money in that wasn't earmarked for something, theoretically, you've got the appropriation space whether we budget to handle such issues. Is that correct? In theory?
Mayor, council member, yes, we create the capacity in our appropriation. Should we come upon additional resources, we can appropriate those through a budget transfer process.
Okay. And my other question, just for Joanne, just real quick, is your top less than 212,000? Just
I think
asking.
they said it was 30,000.
Oh, okay. Just asking.
It was the cover. It's the cover.
just the cover.
Where is it
Kids
at?
need the shade.
Where's it at?
I was referring to the 212. That's why I asked you if it was less than 212.
Yes.
So there were two that will be covered this coming year, and then the one in 18 was going to be for Estrella Vista North, I believe, Nathan. If you can correct me.
Walking out. So do you want Nathan?
Walking back up.
Do you need Nathan one more time to clarify this?
Oh, yes.
Yes, Nathan, come clarify this, because this is I think this is our last discussion on CIP.
On the playground.
Estrella Vista North, 2018. After this coming fiscal year, we will have two playgrounds complete this year, Canada Village and Palm Valley. Both of those playgrounds are funded for this fiscal year with covers. That leaves us one playground remaining at a city park. That's Estrella Vista North, and that is scheduled right now in the asset plan for the following year.
We'll talk to
Estrella Vista North. The challenge with putting, because it is it really has to be viewed as a replacement of the playground and the cover itself. I don't know if we would want to put a cover in place and then a year later go in and put the playground, because then normally you design the cover to accommodate the playground.
So now we are hitting the
probably don't want
212.
That's good management. That's great management. Appreciate that.
Okay.
That doesn't include the one up on the hill in Estrella, though, right?
That does not include that one.
That's still on there.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Nathan. I think the questions are finished. I can't congratulate you. I know, I'm going to give you a break. I just want to congratulate the council, because we weren't sure you were going to finish this CIP, and we were going to have to come back after the regular meeting. But I think that we have, and I suppose if there's some minor questions, then you can ask staff at that, okay? So I'm going to adjourn this meeting. I've given you a 10-minute break, and then we'll go back to the regular meeting. Meeting adjourned.
No, we
But we're not coming, we're going to have the meeting first, the council. Now we're going to reconvene the work session.
all right.
And Mayor, members of the council, as Lori's getting up here to settle in, we got to the point of looking at the CIP discussion, the 10-year CIP. There were a couple of follow-up items, and then we'll be hitting into the carryovers that Lori will take us back through. So the items that we were trying to make sure we had consensus on, one was, and again, there's no voting, this is now work session, but just looking for consensus, kind of yes or no. And the first one is on Litchfield Road. There was a lot of dialogue on the $212,000, both some positive comments, some negative comments, but it wasn't clear on the consensus. So just for staff's benefit, if you could let us know what the consensus is. Again, the landscaping on Litchfield Road south of Yuma in front of the airport includes portions in front of the county island and also in front of the airport itself.
Well, I stand in what I said in the meeting.
For it. Me too. Oh, Carolyn's for it. My little black.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love us to work on getting them to incorporate in the city. Then I'll talk. But until that happens,
wonderful, Joe. But if you're not going to be alive when that happens,
well, then I won't be voting for it either.
With it, make it look better, so we can do something.
No,
it's not going to happen.
I can't go to our citizens and spend money on something to improve a county island. I'm sorry, I can't.
Get a job. You can't do that.
Hey, we've got people that live in Avondale businesses that shop in us. Do we give money to Avondale?
Avondale, and I'm telling you,
No.
Surprise and Avondale and all of them have put big bucks into economic development and doing what they need to do.
I have no problem if it's in our
companies and
city.
get
I
jobs.
have no problem if it's in our city.
Okay, we know Joe's opinion, mine opinion. We have one more down there. Any other opinions?
No.
Yes.
Do I have a park? That was my thing. I told you I was negotiating.
So,
Vice Mayor?
My concern is what I said in the meeting. I understand where it's at in the city. People do drive through it to get to some of their other areas, but I want to make sure there's other medians that haven't been. I think we're in the CIP before, like the one going up to Estrella and some of the others. I want to make sure those are taken care of and that this one doesn't bump like the Bullard or the other one. Make sure those are taken care of first and then put this one in line, and then I'm okay with it. I just don't want to see it bumped before some of the other ones.
So you're saying you liked when we talked about the Bullard, at the Yuma and Bullard.
I think this should go. Oh, sorry. I think this should go before that one. And I know there's a couple that I think were in last year's CIP that haven't been completed yet. I want to make sure those are done first. Like going up the mountain, I know there was one. I like to make sure that those are done, taken care of first before we start bumping other stuff in front of it.
What I may suggest on that, we'll be getting into carryovers that talks about some of those projects, so we can get into those in a little more detail just to see if that answers your concern.
Bill?
Do we know if there are existing medians that are not finished? That might be a huge question.
Mayor, we can bring up Nathan Torres, and then also, Lori, it would be good to talk about what's in the carryover as well.
Do we have any medians that are not programmed but not finished?
Yeah, I'm gonna do my best here, and I would probably say we're probably going to need to get some firm information back to you on that. But it's my recollection that along with the medians that were just improved on Van Buren, also were included in the next phase for the Estrella Parkway. That's just south of Lower Buckeye. Those medians there are also scheduled. And I believe that completes us for unimproved medians in our city. I believe the ones that are in question now in front of the Lockheed building are the remaining unimproved medians at this point.
So this one would not be coming before. That's what we just heard from you, that you've already got them lined up. This would be coming after those two.
Correct. The ones I spoke to previously are already funded.
Thank you.
Now, in terms of will they be completed this year or carried over to the next, that's the part that I'm not sure of at this point.
Yeah, that wasn't my greater question was, do we have any that we haven't done yet? And you're indicating the answer to that.
It's my understanding that these are the remaining unimproved medians in the city.
Thanks.
Yes, go ahead, Vice Mayor.
And I don't really remember. I know we were talking about something on Bullard to make it kind of a gateway. I don't know if Nathan needs to come back or not.
Bullard and Yuma.
Bullard and Yuma. Would this bump that one, or is that in one of the ones that's already programmed?
That was Bullard and Yuma, wasn't it? The way
Bullard and Yuma is an improved intersection.
Yeah.
So that is not, it's not median, but it is the intersection itself. So that will be, Rebecca, if you can speak to what that project is.
Well, and we actually have two projects. So the Bullard and Van Buren intersection is actually the one that we've talked about being a gateway. And so currently we have the 3 legs that are finished, and the gateway project, as I'll call it, is the southern leg of Bullard for approximately 500 feet. So widening that area and also installing landscaping, probably a more lush landscaping to make it more inviting, but it doesn't extend all the way down to Yuma. And then also in the CIP, we have Yuma and Bullard improvements, but that's not for some time. Do you see that in there? And it's for the finishing out of the traffic signal as well as the 4 corners, but no legs of the intersection, similar to what I just mentioned on the Bullard.
Thank you. That helps me.
Yeah, thank you for correcting me because it is on the Van Buren and the Bullard. Yeah. Did you get your questions answered, Bill? Okay. So do you have any idea what this council?
Again, without voting, I started to see consensus with kind of I believe we have consensus, but I just want to make sure of that.
Well, I can't nod any more than I'm nodding.
I see 3 heads nodding.
I've been doing this for an awful long time on those roads.
So, Mayor and Council, thank you. We have consensus on that. And then the other item, and I don't know if Councilmember Osborne got to finish a discussion. I know that there was a discussion that if you got the Estrella Vista North Park project, that would be a good thing. But there was not further discussion on that. So I just want to see where council's at on that. Nathan had talked about 2 of the parks being improved this year. And then the other one, Estrella Vista North, wouldn't be until fiscal 2018. So what's on the table is, do we try and move up the Estrella Vista North Park? And that's a question to council. Move it from 2018 to this coming fiscal year, that'd be moving it up a year.
Well, if I may, I heard the discussion, but I didn't hear that we said we wanted to move it up. Councilmember Osborne said she would like to.
She was presenting a little different.
Be sure there was a cover over the playground, and then our Parks and Recreation Director said, well, we have that playground programmed to be redone, and we really should redo the playground first before we put the top on, so that, because that's, you normally build a playground and then you cover it. And so I didn't get the impression we were asking to move it up, but we would like to have it done. So where would we get the money? And how much is it?
And Councilmember Campbell, when Nathan did talk about what would happen with that improvement, it would involve replacing the playground equipment. So all in, it's $100,000. It's not just a canopy. It's as Nathan pointed out, it would be installing new parks equipment as well there. So we didn't get a chance to really finish that dialogue. I just wanted to see, is there interest in moving it up? If there is, then we would look at how that would be funded. It'd be within parks, already within budgeted projects. It would be in the asset management, and really just a direction to Nathan to look at where the asset management gets replaced next. So could he move one up and one back? And that's one that right now I'm not sure what that would look like. What would be moved back a year? What would be moved up a year?
I think leave it up to Nathan to complete what he needs to complete, and then.
But may I speak?
Councilman Osborne.
When I originally brought this up, it was the fact that we've been discussing monies across our city in different avenues, and it was like there were items that some people didn't feel priority stood there. And so I'm throwing out something that I think is a priority to our citizens, and my biggest concern was the fact that we had this playground set that did not have a cover over it. I had no idea, understanding that all of the playground equipment needed to be replaced within the next year. So the question was, well, can we move it up a year? I don't know what that means, and that's unfair, I'm sure, for all the council to say yes or no right now, because just as Nathan needs to show us, if we move one back or one forward, we don't know what that means. I would hate to say, yes, do this tonight, when really that puts him at a disadvantage for a different park. However, it was back to the prioritization of all these one-time funds and things like that. And, I know that Councilmember Pizzillo doesn't want to spend money on an area that is a county island. Well, that funds then, to me, in his, at least, in his thought process, should be going towards something for our citizens. So that was the whole reason for my, pushing for priority of different items.
And my priority was
economic
development.
I understand
jobs.
that. And
So
I
I'm
do
saying-
want it. And it wasn't that, in fact, I would pick Litchfield Road over the Bullard area. I believe that there is a real concern for Litchfield Road. And so I agree with you, Mayor. I think it should be put there. But I want to see the things from our citizens first, and that was the point of fighting for the park. But I didn't know it had to have the whole playground equipment and all that. I was just looking for a shade canopy.
You have to tell us what we sound like. You're the one that's asking what our opinion is.
Well, in Mayor and Council, it's tough. The funding, you don't know what would move around within Nathan's area within asset management, and that's something that we'd ask him to look at. The other question is, are there other places? If this is a priority from council, I just need to first understand that, and then second, I'd ask budget what are options for that if in fact they're not within the parks area. Maybe they need to remain that way, but is there an interest on the part of council first to determine if that's a priority to move up that park improvement for Estrella Vista North?
Mayor?
Yes.
Brian, I don't know that that's a fair question without other understanding. I just don't know that is, without seeing what that means in his plan of things on the spot right now. It's back to other funding of items that I'm questioning.
Mayor?
Yes. Molly?
I totally trust Nathan's call on when we need to replace playground equipment, because he has staff that goes out and looks at it, and they know when to do it. And I would hope that if he thought he could do all three of those playgrounds for whatever year we're talking about, 16, 17, 17, 18, or whatever.
Right. Currently he has two in 17, one in 18.
Right. He would have proposed that. But I do want to see Estrella Vista redone with a cover, but I would like it done in the appropriate time frame that Nathan has determined it's feasible. Because if we don't, we're going to have to take $100,000 from something else we want to do. It's just like when I was asking about the police, adding more police officers. What do I have to give up if we did that? So we just don't have $100,000 laying around.
But we stopped the $500,000 for the insurance pot of money. And so I don't know if we have taken. That's what I just need a recalculation if we've used all of that or not. And the other thing is even though Nathan may have put it in those timings, and we need to hear from Nathan, it's back to funding. he may wanted to move it up, but he couldn't because of funding. So Nathan.
Yeah.
Well, Nathan, they're putting you on the spot again.
Come tell us what you want us to do. I'm sorry, Nathan. It's not fair.
This is work session. We appreciate the dialogue. I will say that every year with the asset management plan, it's new for us. This is our second year of implementation. And what we found as we get in and evaluate, the asset replacement was based on life cycle analysis. So we're not just replacing something just to replace it. And so I do think that we have some flexibility within the plan next year to possibly move the playground up 1 year early, which it probably needs it now, to be honest with you, and push something out a little further that's less priority. So we have the means within our asset management plan to do that.
Thank you.
Councilman Stipp.
So we've had this discussion about, and this is my last chance. How are we going to spend all this money? How are we going to do this? And we've not had any discussion about if we were to not spend this, what would the effect be on the $500,000 or $1 million of less borrowing when we go out for the GO bonds, for the prepaid, get that paid up front. What impact does that have? As a council, we've not had that discussion. We've only been looking at how do we spend it. But if we save it and use it to create less debt, then we're helping all of the people who are property owners in this city, both businesses and residential, by lowering their secondary, their debt service, the secondary tax rate. So I don't know if $500,000 or $1 million makes a huge difference in a $20 million bond. But we've not even talked about that. And I'm kind of curious if someone has a
good evening.
Shot.
Yeah, there's a shot at that. We have structured those deals that related to that refunding. Now, we could go back through all the underwriters, but it would be a great deal of work, and we're timing those things to go to market on those things. But that would be at council direction. But we have structured the $1 million.
And I think
no, I'm talking about for future debt.
Larry did that presentation.
Future debt, not for current
Okay.
debt. Future
Right.
debt.
I just got a little nervous on the structure of the bond deals.
That's clearly not the issue. I'm talking about the $20 or $30 million we're talking about for the rec center. If we're planning 30 and we only do 29, what impact does that have on our taxpayers? I don't know.
I don't know it right now either. I mean, we'd be looking at borrowing money at about 3.5% to 4% based on. So I'd have to do the amortization on a schedule like that to tell you what that would be.
Well, I tell you, I think our residents are asking for parks, our residents are asking for things that they can use daily.
Recreation.
I think they're confident in how we're handling our financial process, how we're handling our bonding. I very seldom get anything on a telephone call or an email or anything about in that direction that Councilman Stiff's talking about.
And I'm kind of late to the game here on this. I'd have to look more at also what your current availability on authorization is. I mean, there's a bigger plan here. I mean, if you were looking at the options on bonding or cash, and I just don't have those answers for you tonight. So if that's direction, we could come back with that.
I don't feel that I mean, somebody look at me somehow. No.
On a real rough basis, let's say we didn't pay interest and we just financed it for 20 years.
I think I've gotten up here that we're fine.
Mayor, a couple weeks ago when the great news was brought to us that Larry was finding a way, you all were finding a way that we were saving roughly $17 million.
Right.
Was huge. And I very much respect Councilmember Stipp's feeling about this and not looking for ways to spend money, but how can we, save something or make it better for our taxpayers? Because you all remember last year, I refused to vote for a budget that didn't have a tax decrease for our citizens.
That was the grocery tax.
Yes. And I still didn't, get what I felt was best for our citizens. So I completely respect Councilmember Stipp's feeling about this. I don't know that in the grand scheme of things that what we're talking about, the impacts to our citizens, will it be more important, just as you said, Mayor, for parks, for different, items that people are looking for? Is it jobs? Is it right-of-way landscaping? It's hard to say which is going to be more important. It really is in the grand scheme of everything, of something that they're going to be able to see in the next year versus a savings 20 years down the line. I don't know. But the fact that the city staff is always looking for, can we refinance something that saves us, is incredible.
But we did get a presentation by Larry, an absolutely dynamic one, that told us how much that we were saving the city. And that in itself was unbelievable. I haven't heard another city say that for a long time.
I think the point of wanting to lower debt is very important. It is.
There's no question about it. But you can't keep asking for things up here at the dais. You want that park, and you want to cover, and you want this, and you want that. And then all of a sudden you say, well, we got to save the taxpayers' money. Now, why are we spending this? You have to make a decision. Do you want a quality of life? Do you want to spend on your citizens? You're giving a very mixed message up here. Vice Mayor?
I think one thing that's important is we need to look at our citizen survey and what our citizens have said they wanted. And just this weekend, we had, I think it was the Bubble Run or the Color Run over at this Bubble Run again over at the stadium. And I had some friends that did that. And I saw a lot of very good comments on the changes that were made down Bullard Avenue, because they run that right behind the stadium. So people do notice the changes in our city, and we're a clean city. And I think we've always gotten very high marks on that. So when we look at some of those issues, it's more of an overreaching quality of life and neatness, and it's just an aesthetic issue that people want to come here and live here. And then when we look at the recreation activities, I don't think we should. I agree with Bill that we shouldn't just waste money. We need to be very specific. But when I look at the citizen survey, there's parts of our city that don't have appropriate recreation or sufficient recreation. That's why I would like that park added up in Estrella, because there's some areas that really don't have that type of recreation, and there's some that it's declining. Like Nathan said, the equipment probably could use it. I remember probably earlier the fall, we got the whole update on the life cycle, and so if we can find a way to get some of that a little bit sooner, I think that would make our citizens happier, because people don't want to drive 5 miles to a park because it's 110 and they don't want their kids out there when it's shaded. I mean, it all goes to the quality of life. So that's how I'm kind of looking at what our citizens survey and what they've asked for all of these issues.
All right. Enough of that conversation? Yes.
Mayor, if I may, because I asked Lori to come over here when Chuck was talking to you. And there was a question that was put out there, because we ended up not funding the $500,000 set aside. Yes, some of that was used up. I asked Lori, the remaining amount on that, is there an ability to use that for really anything for council discretion, and at what amount could it in fact fund Estrella Vista North? So Lori, if you can talk about where we're at with the rebalancing the budget, what that might mean for council's interests.
So we basically have the option of a couple options. There is the potential of funding that directly with one-time funds.
You talk a little bit closer to the microphone, please.
Sorry. But probably the better option in terms of staying true to our asset management program would be for us to look at, if you'll recall, we advance fund asset management by putting more resources in the fund than we predict we need for next year. We could certainly make a plan to appropriate more resources next year out of that asset management program and give Nathan the opportunity to go ahead and rebalance and look at that program to come up with his plan. And if he would need those extra resources, they would be appropriated. But if he could delay something else, which would be the spirit of asset management, would be to delay something else. If he could do it, he could do it, but we would still have the capacity, if he couldn't delay it, to go ahead and have an appropriation available from those resources.
Joe Pizzello?
You know, I'd hate to see him delay because typically on your asset management, you have a scheduling system in place. So if he does that, he's swapping out one need for another need, usually. My question to you is there any one-time money that has not been allocated yet?
Yes, there is one-time funds available. We haven't balanced the budget to zero at this point in time.
How much?
So there would be in the neighborhood of $150,000 to $250,000.
Okay. That to me is the bottom line. I mean, if it's been allocated already, that means you're going to have to take from Peter and Paul, to get the balance. But if it's not allocated yet, okay, for your balanced budget, and you have that kind of room, then the discussion is, do you want to allocate it to what they're talking about up here on the dais?
I think I'm getting consensus on that from the council.
So what we would do is fund an additional amount into asset management and plan to spend those funds out of asset management. So we'd still run it through the asset management program.
I think you have your answer to that one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Got to get it some way or the other. Just takes a little bit more talking. Go ahead, Lori.
All righty, we ready to move on?
We're ready.
All right, carryovers. So just as a reminder, carryovers are situations where something is budgeted in this year and it either is not yet been able to get under contract or under the procurement or has not been delivered, or it's something like a construction project that takes multiple years or crosses a fiscal year to complete it, and that we have to move the budget to the year in which the cash will actually be paid out of our accounts. So in terms of the carryovers, for the capital projects, there's $2.74 million in carryovers. Of that, 12.7 is in the general fund, and that includes some of the major items that are being carried over are in the area that we were just talking about in asset management and parks, in both the right-of-way and in the parks asset area. There'll be some carryovers. If you'll recall, in that program, there was both a lot of deferred items that were being addressed, as well as the annual allocation. And I believe we advised you when we recommended that it was possible that some of this would need to carry over. The department has gotten the project manager on board, gotten several contracts underway, but it appears that some of the expenditures and activity won't start until later in June. And one thing I wanted to remind you about on the carryovers that I failed to mention is that we had to make these decisions at the beginning of March. And so the departments do have to take a guess as to how much they might spend this year versus how much will fall into next year. And we do ask them to be conservative. We don't want to take the risk that they will assume it will happen this year and then it slips into next year and we wouldn't have the appropriation to do it next year. And so one of the things we do relative to carryovers is after the year closes, we go back and we reconcile. If a project carried over $1 million, we look at what they spent in the prior year and we restore the project's budget to what it should have been based on those expenditures and what was carried over. But some of the other large areas are the second phase of the Goodyear Boulevard project, the police operations project that's moving forward. Other funds that have CIP carryovers, primarily impact fees for the areas such as, again, some of our projects are multi-funded, so they appear on the carryover list twice, in the general fund portion and then the impact fee portion. And then the Corrugate Aeration Dome rehab project is moving forward. It's ready to move forward. They're going to start construction of the structure and be able to bring that forward. Oops. In terms of the operating budget, there's fewer options for carryovers in the operating budget. Again, carryovers are only done for one-time items. So in the case of the operating budget, the largest carryover is related to the job credit money that has been set aside for existing agreements that will pay out job credits as those companies earn those under our agreements with them. And then the SCBAs, as we have talked before, it's been a 3-year funding process. This is carrying over the funds that were collected in the first 2 years into next year, And if you approve the budget, the third year and final year is funded so that those items can be purchased next year. There's also some money in the Parks Asset Management area in the operating budget as well that would be carrying over. And then we'll go ahead and go through what the big budget is. There are $109 million in revenues supporting the budget. In addition, there are beginning balances that also provide the resources, so the revenue is lower than the expenditure. A lot of the reason for that is we just talked about carryovers. The amount that's budgeted this year will carry over into next year as a resource for those kinds of items. But essentially, you can kind of see here the big piece of the pie. Almost half of our budget is in the general fund, but just basically to give you a picture of what it looks like. The total budget, draft budget, is $254 million. About a little over 40% of that is in day-to-day operations. Another 30% in the capital improvement program. And the contingency item that's shown there is both the general fund contingency, which is at $17.8 million. That's the 3-month or reserve requirement. And the other piece of that is the appropriation contingency that we've talked about before, which is the appropriation capacity should new resources become available. There was a question asked last week about the portion of the property tax levy coming from new construction versus appreciation. And so here we have that information for you. We gave you a guess at the meeting before, but essentially about $445,000 is coming from the new construction piece and $240,000 from the appreciation piece. And then just to provide you information that we provide historically with the recommended increase in positions, and this is at the 18 position number. We would be just slightly inching up our average per our count per population from 6.91 to 7.06. Next steps. I'll go next steps and we can finish talking. How's that? Just to give you an idea of where we're going from here, we'll finish this conversation and then the public budget forums on May 4th here. And then we'll move into the legal adoption steps of the tentative, go through the various property tax and budget publications, do the final budget adoption of the property tax levy in January.
Councilman Basillo?
I also had talked about prior about some comparisons, operations, one fiscal year to another. On the next presentation, can we have something that just kind of breaks out general fund operations X, general fund operations new fiscal year, percentage change?
For general fund specifically?
General fund
okay.
and the enterprise funds, just so you can see what those differences are. If anybody asks us on the outside, we can see operations from one period to another would be nice. I don't know if I mentioned it to the city manager or not. What also is helpful for the constituents out there is one central sheet, 8.5 by 11 sheet that shows high level. It doesn't have to put dollars on there. What some of the projects, one-time projects that we're doing, so we can share where their money's going when somebody asks us that question. Here's where the one-time money's coming from, the general fund. Some of the major projects that we got, and so we just kind of hand that out. Or if somebody asks us a question, we can tell them where those pieces are going. And then with the replacement, since, I've always pushed big time that we're now finally catching up in an area of replacement equipment because during the downtime or during the do that. So it'd be nice to also have a listing of all the replacement equipment that we're doing as well. So that's another thing to share with our constituents where their money's going, whether it's park equipment replacement or vehicles, et cetera. I think that's very helpful.
Do you want that with dollars assigned to that or just a general category?
You know what? I think general category is probably fine. Okay. And it is, it's more Cliff Notes for us when somebody asks, what are you doing? These are the things we're replacing.
And here's just this may not be exactly what you're looking for, but we did try to explain how the budget goes from 236 to 254. And so the major reasons that account for that are this year carryovers are lower than they were into this year. CIP is up primarily due to the water, wastewater activity. Supplementals are a little bit higher this year than last year. Asset management, we're investing more into asset management in this budget. compensation and benefits is about a $2 million increase in the general fund and $1 million in the other funds. And then debt service is going up as a result of that.
And that's not
change.
quite it, but that's helpful to see how it breaks down. What would be more helpful is where they can see their money's going as far as the asset management and some of the CIP and those type of things. So they can see physically where it's going, especially if it deals with the change of or quality of life issues where they're seeing park improvements, they're seeing some type of remodeling of the parks or replacement of the park equipment. They always like to see those type of things. So I just think of a listing of it. And in fact, when I think about the dollars, not dollars individually, total would be great so they know the magnitude. But you don't have to each list one. What the total is for the entire category would be fine. Okay. And I think that's more for our constituents out there when they ask questions. We have that information available to provide to them.
But more in a friendly tone, like the speaking
speaking notes. Yeah.
Notes that we had before. This doesn't have to be like it came off the budget sheet. It just has to have, the information that's important to them. What are you doing with our money? Where is it going? Right. That type of thing. Yes, Brian.
Mayor, Council will actually be working on the presentation for the public, which is first part of May, so it'll incorporate a lot of those elements in there, and certainly Council will have that as well. But
that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. So we're at the end for questions, discussions. Where are we? What's next? Is this it?
That's it on the presentation.
Well, this is it. Good. I didn't want to adjourn anything until I knew that. Any questions? Any more discussion? None whatsoever? Brian, anything for us?
No.
Is it that funny?
The attorney is, but no, Mayor and Council.
I've never heard of a funny attorney.
Me either.
It's a scary concept, let me tell you.
Yes. Well, Council, thank you so much. It's not too late. Who won the bets? You did. All right. So what was your hour?
10:15. I was the earliest.
You were the earliest.
Maybe
okay.
that's what Rourke is laughing at.
Maybe that's what he's laughing at. Well, thank you, staff. Thank you, Council. This meeting is adjourned.